Hand over all property, the CEO's daughter demanded in the boardroom, her designer handbag clashing with our company's austere culture. 8 years as compliance manager taught me to recognize entitled predators. I slid a tiny hardware dongle across the polished table, watching her manicured fingers snatch it carelessly. Legal counsel went white, stood so fast his chair crashed backwards. Who allowed her to hold the compliance device? No one answered as understanding dawned. That single device contained enough evidence to destroy her father's empire. And she had just claimed ownership. I never planned to become the most feared person at Proxima Technologies. As compliance manager, I was supposed to be invisible. Just another corporate functionary, ensuring we checked all the regulatory boxes. But in cybersecurity, especially with government contracts, compliance isn't just paperwork. It's the difference between prosperity and prison. My name is Teresa Calloway, and for 8 years, I built Proxima's compliance department from scratch. I graduated from Stanford with a dual degree in computer science and business ethics, back when combining those fields raised eyebrows. Now, it's the hottest career track in Silicon Valley. But I didn't do it for the money. After watching my father lose everything in the financial crisis because executives cut corners, I dedicated my career to ensuring companies played by the rules. Proxima wasn't always the industry giant it is today. When I joined, we had 80 employees and a handful of modest contracts. Then, Jackson Wells took over as CEO. A former naval intelligence officer with steel gray eyes that never softened, Jackson had connections and vision. Within 3 years, he transformed Proxima into a cybersecurity powerhouse with over 2,000 employees and contracts worth hundreds of millions. I respected Jackson's business acumen. The way he could read a room, identify weaknesses in competitors, and position Proxima to dominate was nothing short of brilliant. But I never trusted him. There was something calculated in his charm, something predatory in how he evaluated people purely as assets or obstacles. The rules are for people without imagination, Teresa, he told me once after I flagged a contract that skirted regulatory requirements. You're smart enough to understand the difference between the letter of the law and its spirit. I disagreed, but kept my department running with meticulous attention to detail. My team of 12 specialists monitored everything from data handling to export controls. We implemented systems that caught violations before they became problems. I created a culture where people came to us when something felt off rather than hiding mistakes. Jackson tolerated my strictness because my department kept Proxima from the scandals that plagued our competitors. Several rival firms faced criminal investigations while we maintained a spotless record. It was a delicate balance of power. He needed me, and I believed in the company's potential to do important work the right way. That balance shifted 6 months ago when Audrey Wells joined the executive team. Jackson's only daughter, 29 years old with an MBA from Harvard and a resume that screamed nepotism. Her title was Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, a position created specifically for her. From our first meeting, Audrey made it clear she considered my department an impediment to agile business practices. She questioned every safeguard, challenged every protocol. In meetings, she referred to compliance as the Department of No. Other executives who previously supported my work began avoiding eye contact when she spoke. My father says you're necessary but not sufficient, she told me, after one particularly tense executive meeting. Necessary for government paperwork, insufficient for modern business growth. I implemented the Dongle system 3 years before Audrey arrived. Each specialized encryption device logged compliance violations automatically, creating unalterable records. Only I and the General Counsel had access to these records. The system was my insurance policy. My way of ensuring Proxima couldn't throw me under the bus if something went wrong. Last Tuesday, I received a company-wide email announcing organizational changes to streamline operations and enhance cross-functional synergy. Buried in the third paragraph was the bombshell. The compliance department will report to the Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives to ensure alignment with business objectives. I was being placed under Audrey's direct control. The one department designed to be independent, to serve as a check on executive power, was now reporting to the CEO's daughter. Everything I had built over 8 years was at risk. When I asked Jackson about the change, his response chilled me. "Teresa, you've done exemplary work establishing our compliance foundation. Now it's time to modernize." Audrey brings fresh perspectives on regulatory efficiency. Regulatory efficiency, a euphemism for finding loopholes. As I left his office, I realized this wasn't just a power struggle. Something fundamental was changing at Proxima, and I had just become an obstacle to be removed. The Monday after the reorganization announcement, Audrey summoned me to her corner office. Unlike my utilitarian workspace filled with reference materials and multiple monitors, her office was a showcase of designer furniture and abstract art. A row of framed photos displayed her posing with celebrities and politicians. "Teresa, I want us to start fresh," she said, gesturing toward a white leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Dad speaks highly of your technical knowledge." "Thank you. I'm proud of the systems we've built," I replied, sitting with my back straight, my expression neutral. "Those systems served their purpose in Proxima's growth phase." She examined her manicured nails. "But we're entering a new era of opportunity. Government compliance requirements are flexible for companies with the right approach." I kept my voice level. Federal cybersecurity regulations aren't designed to be flexible, especially with classified contracts. That's such an old-school mentality. She laughed lightly. "Look, we're competing against firms that know how to work the system. Dad's lined up investors who can take Proxima global, but they need certain assurances about regulatory burdens." The implication was clear. They wanted to present a clean compliance record while cutting corners. I'd spent my career preventing exactly this scenario. "I understand business pressures," I said carefully. "But there are lines we can't cross without risking criminal liability." Audrey's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just review the compliance protocols I'm sending over. We need to streamline before the investor presentation next month." The streamlining proposals arrived that afternoon. They effectively gutted our security protocols for handling sensitive government data. One change eliminated the segregation of classified information. Another removed the two-person authentication requirement for accessing export-controlled technology. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried working within the system. I documented the risks of each proposed change, suggested alternatives, and cited specific regulations. Audrey ignored everything, implementing changes over my objections. During a department head meeting, I raised concerns about a particularly problematic protocol change. The modification to our data access controls violates NIST Special Publication 853 requirements for federal contractors, I explained. Before I could continue, Audrey interrupted. "Teresa is stuck in theoretical compliance rather than practical business solutions. The changes have been reviewed by outside counsel. No one challenged her. Not even departments that would face direct liability." The atmosphere had changed. Everyone was focused on the rumored sale and potential payouts. That evening, I called Martin Fletcher, our general counsel and my longtime ally. Martin had been with Proxima since before Jackson took over. In his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, he was the institutional memory of the company and my most reliable supporter on ethical issues. "Can we meet off-site?" I asked. "Some of these compliance changes could expose us to serious liability." "The Willows Cafe, 7 a.m. tomorrow," he replied, his voice tired. "Bring specifics, not just concerns." I spent the night compiling evidence. The special compliance dongle contained logs of every protocol change, every override, every warning dismissed. I documented how the modifications violated specific contractual obligations with government agencies. The following morning at the Willows Cafe, Martin listened intently as I presented my findings. His normally sharp eyes looked troubled behind his glasses. "This is troubling," he admitted after I finished. But we need to be strategic. Jackson's been planning this company sale for 2 years. The investors are Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds with deep pockets. Martin, some of these changes are criminal violations, not just regulatory ones, I insisted. We're contractually obligated to report breaches to the government. He patted my hand in a grandfatherly gesture. Let me speak with Jackson privately. Frame this as a legal risk to the sale, not just compliance concerns. He responds to financial arguments better than ethical ones. I wanted to believe Martin could influence Jackson. Thank you. I've documented everything on the compliance dongle. It creates immutable records that can't be altered or denied later. Something flickered in Martin's eyes. Keep that secure. Document everything, but be discreet. Give me time to work the legal angles. I left feeling slightly relieved. With Martin's legal expertise backing my compliance concerns, perhaps we could prevent Proxima from crossing irreversible lines. 3 days later, I was called to an emergency meeting with Human Resources. The department director, Gail Thompson, sat beside Audrey. On the table was a formal warning letter citing insubordination and failure to adapt to organizational direction. We understand you've been undermining the approved compliance modifications, Audrey said, her voice smooth as polished marble. Several colleagues have reported your negative comments about leadership decisions. I kept my expression neutral despite my racing heart. I've raised legitimate regulatory concerns through appropriate channels. You've gone beyond professional concerns to personal attacks, Gail replied, not meeting my eyes. This warning letter will be placed in your file. Further incidents could result in termination. As I left the meeting, the betrayal became clear. Martin hadn't advocated for compliance. He'd warned Jackson and Audrey about my documentation. My closest ally had chosen the side of power and profit. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the warning letter. The home I'd once shared with James before my dedication to professional ethics ended our relationship 3 years ago. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't look the other way on minor violations for career advancement. It's how the game is played, he'd argued during our final fight. Now, I understood what Martin had been telling me at the cafe. The subtle emphasis on keeping things secure and discreet wasn't about protecting me. It was about containing me until they could neutralize my influence. I removed the compliance dongle from my desk drawer. The small device contained enough evidence to trigger federal investigations, possibly criminal charges, but whistleblowing would destroy the company I'd helped build, potentially harming thousands of innocent employees. There had to be another way to preserve Proxima's integrity without burning everything to the ground. The warning letter marked the beginning of my professional isolation. Colleagues who previously sought my advice now avoided me in the hallways. My team members were reassigned one by one to other departments, replaced with Audrey's hand-picked recruits with minimal compliance experience. During meetings, my microphone mysteriously malfunctioned when I tried to speak. My access to certain systems was restricted for security reviews that never concluded. Email threads discussing important decisions somehow forgot to include me until after decisions were finalized. It's nothing personal, explained Brady Wilson, the chief technology officer who once respected my judgment. The company's moving in a new direction. Sometimes old guardrails need to be removed for innovation. Brady had been my friend since my first day at Proxima. Now he couldn't look me in the eye as he parroted Audrey's talking points. I maintained a professional facade while documenting everything. Each morning I arrived precisely at 8, dressed impeccably in tailored suits that served as my armor. Each evening I left at 6 after backing up critical records to the compliance dongle. The isolation gave me unexpected freedom to investigate. Without meetings filling my calendar or colleagues watching my moves, I could dig deeper into what was actually happening at Proxima. During a routine review of network access logs that Audrey hadn't thought to restrict, I discovered unusual data transfers occurring during overnight hours. Large encrypted files were being sent to external servers through a carefully disguised back channel in our security architecture. I traced the transfers to a project codenamed Phoenix, which didn't appear in any official company documents. Using my remaining administrative privileges, I discovered Phoenix involved proprietary algorithms developed under a classified Department of Defense contract, algorithms specifically restricted from foreign access under international traffic in arms regulations. The export of such technology without proper licenses carried penalties of up to 20 years imprisonment. Yet here was evidence of systematic transfers to overseas servers, coincidentally located in the same countries as our potential investors. This wasn't just corner cutting, it was espionage and fraud on a scale that threatened national security. I expanded my investigation, carefully covering my digital tracks. Financial records showed millions flowing through shell companies connected to Audrey's personal consulting firm established just before she joined Proxima. The transactions were disguised as strategic consulting services, but aligned perfectly with the unauthorized technology transfers. On Thursday evening, while working late, I overheard Audrey in the conference room adjacent to my office. The thin walls allowed voices to carry when people thought they were alone. "The transfer is 90% complete," she said to someone on speakerphone. "The algorithms are performing exactly as promised in their application. Once the sale closes next month, we'll have fully extracted the valuable IP without raising flags." A male voice responded, "Your father's concerns about the compliance department? Teresa?" Audrey laughed. "She's been neutralized. HR is building a termination case. By next week, she'll be gone, and we'll have someone cooperative heading compliance for the final regulatory sign-offs. And the documentation system she implemented, Martin assures me it's contained. She created some kind of special tracking device, but without access to our systems, it's useless. Once she's terminated, we'll decommission her entire monitoring infrastructure." I froze, barely breathing. This wasn't just about cutting corners for a company sale. Audrey wasn't following her father's directions. She was orchestrating the systematic theft of classified technology while setting up Jackson to take the legal fall when inevitably discovered. The next morning, I received a calendar invitation for a board meeting the following Monday to discuss department restructuring. My termination was being formalized. That weekend, I faced the hardest decision of my professional life. I had always worked within the system, believing that proper procedures and documentation would ultimately protect organizational integrity. Now I realized I was fighting something more insidious than mere corporate greed. I thought about my father, broken by financial fraud he never saw coming. About James, who couldn't understand why principles mattered more than advancement. About the thousands of Proxima employees who would face investigations and uncertainty if the company imploded from scandal. On Sunday evening, I called Amanda Larson, a former colleague who now worked for the Defense Contract Audit Agency. We had maintained a friendship after she left Proxima 3 years earlier. "I need hypothetical advice," I said after preliminaries. "If someone discovered classified technology being illegally transferred to foreign entities, what would be the proper reporting procedure?" Amanda's voice turned serious. "This isn't hypothetical, is it, Teresa?" "I can't say more without proper channels," I replied carefully. "Documentation is everything in these cases," she said. "Contemporaneous evidence, unaltered records, chain of custody. Without rock-solid proof, it becomes a credibility contest that whistleblowers rarely win. What if termination is imminent? Does that invalidate evidence collected? Not if the evidence was gathered during legitimate job duties," Amanda explained. "But timing matters. If you report after termination, the narrative becomes disgruntled ex-employee regardless of merit." After our call, I stared at the compliance dongle containing months of meticulously documented violations. It wasn't enough to stop what was happening. I needed to ensure the evidence couldn't be dismissed or buried. That's when I realized Audrey's greatest weakness was the same as her father's arrogance. They were so convinced of their power and my powerlessness that they might make a critical mistake. All I needed was to engineer the right moment and be prepared to act. The board meeting invitation wasn't just a threat, it was an opportunity. Monday morning arrived with a heaviness I hadn't felt since testifying against financial fraud at my father's former company years ago. That experience had taught me that justice required more than truth. It needed strategic presentation and unimpeachable evidence. I dressed with particular care in a charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes, pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for graduation, and low heels that allowed quick movement without sacrificing professional appearance. My preparations went beyond wardrobe. I had spent Sunday night organizing the compliance dongle with meticulous indexing of every violation, every unauthorized transfer, every falsified certification. The special hardware had a feature few at Proxima knew about. As compliance manager, I had designed it with a legal principle called chain of custody in mind. The device recorded not just data, but who possessed it and when. Transfers of possession were logged with timestamps and could not be altered. This feature, implemented to protect evidence integrity for potential government audits, was about to serve a different purpose. At my desk, I found a fresh batch of emails excluding me from key discussions. One particular thread caught my attention. The board wasn't just discussing restructuring. They were finalizing a $500 million government contract based on certifications that Proxima had met all compliance requirements. The contract required capabilities that could only be delivered using the classified algorithms being illegally transferred abroad. Proxima was essentially selling the government its own stolen technology, while creating plausible deniability through the pending company sale. Shortly before the 1 p.m. board meeting, Martin Fletcher stopped by my office. His expression carried the false concern of someone delivering rehearsed sympathy. "Teresa, today's meeting will be difficult," he said, closing my door. "I've advised Jackson that any personnel changes should be handled with appropriate severance and non-disclosure agreements." "Is that what this is about, Martin? Severance packages?" I kept my voice neutral while my mind raced. He removed his glasses, a gesture he used when trying to appear sincere. "You've been a valuable contributor to Proxima's growth, but your approach to compliance has become incompatible with our evolving business model." "You mean I won't ignore federal violations?" I replied. "You used to value integrity, Martin." A flash of genuine emotion crossed his face before his professional mask returned. "Business survival sometimes requires flexibility. The compliance issues you've identified are technical, not substantive. Selling restricted technology to foreign entities is substantive," I said quietly, "as is falsifying federal certifications." Martin blanched slightly. "Be very careful with unfounded accusations, Teresa. Very careful indeed." After he left, I made final preparations. I secured copies of key evidence in multiple locations, including an encrypted email scheduled to send to federal authorities if I didn't enter a cancellation code within 24 hours. I wasn't just protecting Proxima's integrity anymore. I was protecting myself. At 1 p.m. sharp, I entered the boardroom on the top floor of Proxima headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the San Francisco skyline, a reminder of how far the company had come. The 20-foot rosewood table gleamed under recessed lighting. Around it sat 12 people who collectively controlled Proxima's fate. Jackson Wells occupied the head chair, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority. Audrey sat at his right hand in a red designer dress that stood out among the conservative business attire. Board members filled the remaining seats, mostly venture capitalists and former technology executives who had backed Jackson's vision. Martin sat opposite Audrey, legal folders neatly arranged before him. He avoided my gaze as I took the only remaining chair directly across from Audrey. "Thank you all for coming," Jackson began. "Before we address the main contract approval, Audrey has a departmental update." Audrey smiled with practiced charm. "As you know, we've been modernizing our approach to regulatory compliance. The changes have positioned us to meet all requirements for the new federal contract while maintaining operational flexibility." Several board members nodded approvingly. None asked what operational flexibility actually meant. "The compliance department restructuring is the final step in this modernization," she continued. "We've identified redundancies and inefficiencies that can be eliminated." She never said my name, referring instead to legacy approaches and outdated methodologies. The message was clear. I represented the past. She represented the future. When she finished, Jackson smoothly transitioned to the main agenda. Now, regarding the federal contract certification, all required documentation has been prepared, showing full compliance with security protocols. Martin has reviewed and approved the legal attestations. Martin nodded on cue, sliding folders to each board member. The certifications meet all technical requirements. Management has assured me all systems are compliant. I watched the perfect choreography of this boardroom dance. They had orchestrated everything to maintain plausible deniability. Jackson never directly lied. Martin carefully qualified his statements. Audrey spoke in euphemisms. Each protected themselves while collectively committing fraud. After unanimous approval of the contract certification, Jackson turned to what everyone knew was the real purpose of my presence. Teresa, as part of our reorganization, your current position is being eliminated. His tone was professionally regretful. Audrey will oversee a streamlined compliance function integrated with strategic initiatives. I nodded calmly, having expected exactly this approach. We value your contributions, Jackson continued, and have prepared a generous separation package, including continued health benefits and 6 months' salary. Martin slid a folder toward me. The agreement includes standard confidentiality provisions and a non-disparagement clause. I didn't touch the folder. What about the compliance systems I've implemented? The ongoing monitoring requirements for federal contracts? We'll handle the transition, Audrey interjected. As part of the separation process, we'll need you to turn over all company property and access credentials immediately. Her emphasis on immediately confirmed my suspicion. They wanted to cut my access before I could gather or preserve additional evidence. They didn't know I had been preparing for weeks. Jackson gestured to an HR representative waiting by the door. Diane will escort you to collect your personal belongings after our meeting concludes. Audrey leaned forward, her expression hardening. Hand over all property, she demanded, extending her hand across the table. Security access cards, laptop, and any company devices in your possession. The moment had arrived. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the small black compliance dongle. Without breaking eye contact with Audrey, I slid it across the polished table surface. Audrey grabbed it impatiently, clearly not recognizing what it was, just another piece of corporate technology to be collected and disposed of. Martin, however, recognized it instantly. His face drained of color. He stood so quickly his chair toppled backward with a crash that silenced the room. Who allowed her to hold the compliance device? He shouted, his carefully cultivated professional demeanor shattered. Every head turned toward Martin. Then to the small device in Audrey's manicured fingers. No one answered as understanding slowly dawned across the room. For the first time since I'd known her, Audrey Wells looked uncertain. The silence following Martin's outburst stretched for several seconds as the implications registered throughout the room. Board members exchanged confused glances while Jackson's expression darkened with growing concern. What compliance device? Audrey finally asked, examining the small black dongle in her hand. This is just a standard encrypted drive. I allowed myself a small, composed smile. Actually, it's a specialized compliance logging system. The one I implemented 3 years ago to create tamper-proof records of all regulatory activities. Martin had recovered enough to right his chair and sit down, though his complexion remained ashen. Jackson, we need to pause this meeting immediately for legal consultation. Jackson's eyes narrowed. Explain the concern, Martin. Before the general counsel could respond, I continued in a calm, measured tone. That device contains comprehensive records of every compliance violation at Proxima for the past 12 months. Every unauthorized access to classified systems, every falsified certification, every illegal technology transfer under Project Phoenix. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Board members shifted uncomfortably, several closing their folders as if to distance themselves from the proceedings. This is absurd, Audrey scoffed, though her fingers tightened around the dongle. Project Phoenix is a legitimate business development initiative. involving the transfer of ITAR-restricted algorithms to foreign entities without proper export licenses, I replied. A federal crime carrying penalties of up to 20 years imprisonment per occurrence. Jackson's practiced composure slipped momentarily. Teresa, making unfounded accusations in this forum, could constitute defamation. Every accusation is documented on that device, I said, nodding toward the dongle still clutched in Audrey's hand. With timestamps, user credentials, and digital signatures that would be admissible in federal court. Martin cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately, with appropriate legal counsel present. Why? I asked innocently. Everything I've said concerns Proxima's official compliance records, which fall under my professional responsibilities. As compliance manager, I'm obligated to ensure the board is fully informed of regulatory risks. One of the board members, Patricia Winters, a former federal prosecutor who had always seemed more concerned with governance than the others, leaned forward. I'd like to understand exactly what regulatory violations you're alleging. Before Jackson or Audrey could interrupt, I addressed Patricia directly. The compliance dongle contains evidence of 3 categories of violations. First, systematic breaches of our federal contract security requirements. Second, illegal exports of classified technology to unauthorized foreign recipients. Third, falsified certifications to government agencies regarding our compliance status. Patricia's expression hardened. And this evidence is now in whose possession? Technically, it's in Audrey's possession, I replied. She just demanded all company property in her official capacity, and I complied by surrendering the device to her. The transfer of possession has been logged by the device itself with a timestamp and multiple witnesses. Understanding dawned on Martin's face as the legal implications became clear. Miss Wells, please don't touch anything else on that device, he said urgently. Audrey looked between the dongle in her hand and her father. This is ridiculous. I'll just delete whatever false records she's created. I wouldn't recommend that, I said mildly. The device has tamper-evident features. Attempting to delete or modify records would only create additional evidence of obstruction. Jackson's face had turned to granite. Martin, is there legal exposure here? The general counsel hesitated, visibly caught between his obligation to the company and his loyalty to Jackson. If the device contains what Teresa claims, and if Audrey now has possession of it, yes, there could be significant exposure. This is a setup, Audrey hissed, attempting to slide the dongle back across the table to me. I'm not accepting this. Too late, I replied, making no move to touch the device. The chain of custody has already been established and logged. You demanded company property, identified yourself as having authority to take possession, and accepted the device. That's all documented now. Another board member, James Harrington from the audit committee, spoke up. I think we need to understand exactly what's on this device before proceeding further. I agree, said Patricia firmly. As a board member with fiduciary responsibility, I need to know if we've just approved contract certifications that contain material misrepresentations. Jackson attempted to regain control of the meeting. This is clearly a misunderstanding that we can address through proper channels. Like the proper channels used to approve Project Phoenix? I asked. The classified technology transfer that was never documented in official company records? Audrey stood abruptly. This is a terminated employee making desperate accusations. There's no Project Phoenix. I reached into my bag and removed a folder, sliding it toward Patricia rather than Jackson. These are printouts of selected evidence already preserved on the compliance dongle. Page 3 shows the Project Phoenix authorization with your electronic signature, Audrey. Page 12 shows the corresponding wire transfers to your personal consulting company. As Patricia reviewed the documents, her expression grew increasingly severe. Other board members leaned toward her, trying to see the evidence for themselves. If these records are accurate, Patricia said slowly, we have a serious governance failure that requires immediate independent investigation. The records are fabricated, Jackson insisted, though doubt had crept into his voice. Everything on that device is digitally signed and time-stamped, I explained. The system was implemented specifically to prevent tampering or post hoc fabrication. That's why Martin reacted so strongly when he saw Audrey take possession of it. All eyes turned to the general counsel, whose discomfort was now painfully evident. "Martin?" Jackson prompted, his tone carrying a warning. After a moment's hesitation, Martin nodded reluctantly. The compliance logging system Teresa implemented does create legally admissible records that can't be altered once recorded. It was approved by this board 3 years ago as part of our federal contracting requirements. "And now all those records are legally in my daughter's possession?" Jackson asked, the implications finally sinking in. "It appears so," Martin confirmed grimly. Audrey stood, her composure cracking. "This is absurd. I'm not taking responsibility for her records." She attempted to drop the dongle onto the table. "The transfer of possession has already been logged," I reminded her. "Abandoning the device now doesn't change that." Patricia turned to Jackson. "As a board member, I move that we immediately engage outside counsel and forensic experts to review these allegations." "I second the motion," James added quickly. Jackson's face had become unreadable, but the slight tremor in his hand betrayed his understanding of the situation's severity. His empire was beginning to crumble, and his daughter had just become the legal custodian of the evidence against them both. "There's one more thing you should know," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the chaos unfolding. 17 minutes ago, when this meeting officially began, an automated system transmitted backup copies of all these records to secure locations. The transmission included a recording of this meeting confirming the transfer of the compliance device to Audrey. Martin closed his eyes briefly, in recognition of the legal checkmate. "You were recording this meeting without consent?" Jackson demanded, grasping at procedural straws. "Proxima's board meeting policy specifically authorizes recording for compliance documentation purposes," I replied. Section 7. Paragraph 4 of the Corporate Governance Charter. "I believe you approved that policy yourself, Mr. Wells." Before Jackson could respond, the boardroom door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered, their expressions professionally neutral. "Excuse the interruption," the taller one said, displaying a federal badge. "I'm Special Agent Thomas Carter, FBI Cyber Division. We have a warrant to secure electronic records related to an ongoing investigation into export control violations." Patricia Winters rose to her feet. "I believe those records are currently in the possession of Miss Audrey Wells," she said, pointing to the stunned woman still holding the compliance dongle. As Agent Carter approached Audrey, the reality of what had just happened seemed to finally register on Jackson's face. The carefully constructed facade of Proxima's compliance, the foundation of his empire, had been shattered by a small black device now being placed in an evidence bag by federal agents. And I, the compliance manager he had planned to discard, had engineered it all. The boardroom erupted into controlled chaos following the FBI agent's arrival. Board members huddled with Martin, demanding to know their personal exposure. Jackson was on his phone, presumably calling his personal attorney. Audrey stood frozen as Agent Carter sealed the compliance dongle in an evidence bag with meticulous care. "Miss Calloway," the second FBI agent said, approaching me, "I'm Special Agent Rivera. We'd appreciate your cooperation in explaining the logging system you implemented." "Of course," I replied calmly. "The system creates cryptographically secured records of compliance-related activities with immutable timestamps. Each entry includes user authentication data and cannot be altered or deleted once recorded." "And you transferred this device to Miss Wells during this meeting?" he confirmed. "She demanded all company property in her official capacity. I complied by surrendering the compliance device to her, establishing a clear chain of custody witnessed by everyone in this room." Agent Rivera nodded approvingly at the careful legal framing of my answer. Jackson finally found his voice, addressing the agents with the authoritative tone that had intimidated countless business rivals. "This is a corporate governance matter that we're addressing internally. Your warrant seems premature given the circumstances." Agent Carter remained unimpressed. We're executing a lawful warrant based on evidence of multiple federal violations, including the illegal export of controlled defense technologies. What evidence? Jackson demanded. Evidence provided by a confidential source, Agent Carter replied, and now corroborated by the device in our possession. I maintained a neutral expression, but inwardly I acknowledged Amanda Larson's crucial role. My Sunday call had not been merely for advice. It had been a carefully worded disclosure to someone I trusted at the Defense Contract Audit Agency. She had understood immediately and engaged the proper authorities. Patricia Winters had separated herself from the other board members. As a former federal prosecutor, I advised this board to cooperate fully with the investigation, she announced. Any attempt to obstruct or delay would create additional liability for the company and potentially for us as individuals. Her declaration visibly deflated resistance among the other directors, who now seemed primarily concerned with distancing themselves from Jackson and Audrey. We'll need to interview each of you, Agent Rivera informed the group. For now, please remain in the building. Additional agents are securing electronic evidence throughout the facility. Martin had regained enough composure to assert some control. As General Counsel, I'll coordinate the company's response. All interviews should have legal representation present. Of course, Agent Carter agreed. Though individuals may wish to retain separate counsel given the potential conflicts of interest, the implication that some in the room might be targets rather than witnesses sent another wave of anxiety through the directors. While the agents consulted with Martin about logistical arrangements, Jackson maneuvered to my side of the table. His voice was low, controlled, but laced with cold fury. You've made a catastrophic mistake, Teresa. When this misunderstanding is clarified, there won't be a compliance position for you anywhere in this industry. I met his gaze steadily. The only mistake was betraying the trust of thousands of employees and dozens of government agencies for personal profit. The evidence isn't limited to the Dongle, Mr. Wells. Before he could respond, Audrey approached, her earlier confidence replaced by barely contained panic. Whatever you think you know about Project Phoenix is wrong, she hissed. It was a legitimate business initiative, involving your personal consulting company that received millions in transfers coordinated with unauthorized technology exports? I asked quietly. The financial records are particularly detailed, including the offshore accounts. The color drained from her face. You've destroyed everything my father built. No, Audrey. You did that when you decided to sell classified American technology to foreign entities? I replied. I'm just ensuring accountability. Agent Carter interrupted our exchange. Miss Calloway, we'd like to begin with your statement if you're ready. Of course, I agreed, gathering my materials. This isn't over, Jackson warned as I stood to leave. Actually, Mr. Wells, I believe it is, I replied, with the confidence of someone who had planned meticulously for this moment. I was escorted to a conference room where Agent Carter explained the process while Agent Rivera set up recording equipment. For the next 4 hours, I provided a detailed account of everything I had discovered. The systematic dismantling of compliance protocols, the unauthorized technology transfers, the falsified certifications, and the financial beneficiaries of these activities. Throughout my statement, I maintained professional detachment, focusing on facts rather than speculation or accusation. My documentation was thorough, cross-referenced, and precisely organized. The agent seemed impressed by the methodical approach. You've been preparing this for some time, Agent Carter observed during a break. I've been doing my job as compliance manager, I corrected gently. When I discovered potential violations, I documented them according to proper procedures. When internal reporting channels failed, I preserved the evidence until appropriate authorities could investigate. By evening, the Proxima headquarters had transformed into an investigation scene. Employees watched wide-eyed as agents secured computers and servers. Rumors spread rapidly through text messages and hushed conversations in the parking garage. At 9:30 p.m., as I was completing my initial statement, Martin appeared in the doorway of the conference room, his expression grave. The board has called an emergency session, he announced after the agents acknowledged his presence. They've voted to place Jackson and Audrey on administrative leave pending investigation. Patricia Winters has been named interim CEO. I nodded, unsurprised by the board's self-preservation instincts. They're requesting your participation to understand the full scope of compliance issues, Martin continued, visibly uncomfortable. Given your unique position, my unique position as the terminated compliance manager who prevented a massive fraud? I asked mildly. Martin had the grace to look ashamed. Your termination has been rescinded, obviously. The board recognizes your diligence. Agent Carter intervened. Miss Calloway is currently providing evidence in a federal investigation. Her availability for corporate damage control is not our priority. Of course, Martin conceded. But certain government contracts require active compliance oversight. Without Teresa's expertise, we may face additional regulatory issues. It was a transparent attempt to regain control of the situation, but it contained a kernel of legitimate concern. Thousands of employees depended on those contracts continuing. I can brief the interim leadership after completing my statement, I offered, looking to Agent Rivera for approval, assuming it wouldn't compromise your investigation. The agents conferred briefly before agreeing to a limited briefing focused on maintaining ongoing compliance rather than the investigation details. 3 hours later, I entered a different conference room where Patricia Winters was meeting with a crisis management team. The atmosphere was tense, but focused, a stark contrast to the boardroom earlier. Teresa, Patricia greeted me, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. We're trying to stabilize the situation and need your insights on immediate compliance priorities. For the next 2 hours, I outlined the critical compliance systems that needed to be maintained to prevent contract violations. I identified key personnel who could ensure continuity and flagged high-risk areas requiring immediate attention. Patricia listened intently, asking precise questions that demonstrated a genuine concern for proper governance. The board has authorized me to restructure the compliance function with complete independence, she explained. We want to ensure this never happens again. That would require fundamental changes to corporate culture, not just organizational charts, I replied honestly. Exactly why we need your continued involvement, Patricia said. But I understand if you're hesitant, given recent events. I considered the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on Proxima navigating this crisis. The company itself wasn't corrupt, its leadership had been. I'll help stabilize compliance systems during the transition, I agreed cautiously. But my cooperation with the federal investigation takes precedence. Completely understood, Patricia assured me. Transparency and accountability are our only path forward. As the meeting concluded around 2 a.m., Patricia walked me to the elevator. For what it's worth, several board members have acknowledged we failed in our oversight duties. What you did took extraordinary courage and integrity. It shouldn't require extraordinary courage to follow the law, I replied. That's the culture that needs to change. The following days brought waves of revelations as the investigation expanded. News outlets reported FBI raids at multiple locations connected to Proxima's foreign dealings. Financial analysts speculated about the company's survival prospects. Employees gathered in break rooms, anxiously discussing their futures. 1 week after the boardroom confrontation, federal prosecutors announced the first indictments. Jackson and Audrey Wells were charged with multiple felonies, including conspiracy, wire fraud, export control violations, and false statements to government agencies. Martin Fletcher faced lesser charges, but had reportedly begun cooperating with authorities. The evidence from the compliance dongle had proven exactly as robust as I had claimed. Every record withstood forensic examination, creating an unimpeachable timeline of violations that left no room for plausible deniability. Jackson and Audrey had underestimated not just my resolve, but my technical implementation. The system I had designed was sophisticated enough to capture their actions, but simple enough to be completely understandable to investigators and eventually, jurors. As Patricia had predicted, several board members faced civil penalties for neglecting their fiduciary duties. The company itself entered into a deferred prosecution agreement, committing to extensive reforms and ongoing monitoring. 3 months after that fateful board meeting, Proxima remained operational but transformed. Government agencies had allowed critical contracts to continue under strict oversight, preserving thousands of jobs while ensuring compliance with all requirements. What Jackson and Audrey never understood was that compliance wasn't an obstacle to business success. It was the foundation for sustainable growth. By choosing short-term profits over integrity, they had nearly destroyed everything they claimed to value. The compliance dongle, designed as a safeguard for proper business conduct, had instead become the instrument of their downfall. In demanding my surrender of company property, Audrey had unknowingly claimed ownership of the very evidence that would destroy her career and freedom. Sometimes justice requires more than truth. It requires placing truth in exactly the right hands, at precisely the right moment. Please state your name and position for the record. I adjusted the microphone slightly before responding to the Congressional Committee Chairwoman, Teresa, Chief Compliance Officer at Proxima Technologies. The Hart Senate Office Building hearing room was filled to capacity, with journalists and industry observers crowded into the public seating area. C-SPAN cameras captured every moment of the proceedings, which had been convened to examine corporate compliance failures and national security implications. Ms. Calloway, you've provided written testimony regarding the compliance breaches at Proxima Technologies, the chairwoman continued. Could you summarize for the committee how these violations were able to occur despite existing regulatory frameworks? Certainly, Madam Chairwoman, I replied. The failures at Proxima demonstrate that regulatory frameworks are only effective when implemented with genuine commitment to compliance rather than surface-level checkbox exercises. When leadership views compliance as an obstacle to be circumvented rather than a foundation for ethical business practice, even robust systems can be undermined. For the next 3 hours, I answered detailed questions about Proxima's compliance failures, the remediation efforts now underway, and recommendations for strengthening corporate accountability. Throughout my testimony, I maintained the same professional composure and attention to detail that had characterized my work as compliance manager. 6 months had passed since the boardroom confrontation that exposed Jackson and Audrey Wells' corrupt activities. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of federal investigations, internal reforms, and industry-wide reckoning with compliance practices. The day after my congressional testimony concluded, I returned to Proxima's headquarters. The building looked the same from the outside, but internally, almost everything had changed. Patricia Winters greeted me in the lobby. After serving as interim CEO during the crisis, she had accepted the permanent position when offered by the reconstituted board of directors. Her background as a former federal prosecutor had proven invaluable in navigating the company through the storm of investigations and reforms. Your testimony was excellent, she said as we walked toward the executive floor. Clear, factual, and constructive. Several committee members called me afterward to express how impressed they were. I just told the truth, I replied. The facts speak for themselves, Patricia smiled. The ability to present complex facts clearly is a rare skill, Teresa. One of many reasons your leadership has been so crucial during this transition. My promotion to Chief Compliance Officer had come 3 months earlier, accompanied by a seat on the Executive Committee and direct reporting line to the board's newly empowered Audit and Compliance Committee. My department had expanded from 12 specialists to 30, with resources and authority that would have been unimaginable under Jackson's leadership. The engineering team has completed the enhanced monitoring system implementation, I reported as we entered the conference room where the executive committee gathered each morning. All classified projects now have triple-layer verification protocols with segregated access controls. The faces around the table nodded appreciatively. Most were new, brought in after the scandal to rebuild Proxima's leadership with a commitment to ethical business practices. A few, like Brady Wilson, had remained, having demonstrated they were misled rather than complicit in the previous regime's violations. The Department of Defense has approved our remediation plan, Patricia announced to the group. They've agreed to lift the enhanced monitoring requirements after 6 months if we maintain perfect compliance. A wave of relieved expressions swept around the table. The company's future had hung in the balance, with thousands of jobs at stake. The restoration of trust with government clients represented a critical milestone in Proxima's recovery. After the meeting, Brady lingered to speak with me privately. Our friendship had been strained by his initial failure to support my compliance concerns, but we were gradually rebuilding professional trust. "I should have listened when you first raised concerns," he said, "not for the first time. I got caught up in the excitement of the expansion plans and lost sight of what really matters." "What matters now is that you're part of the solution," I replied. "Your technical expertise is essential to implementing proper safeguards." Brady nodded gratefully. "The new systems are actually making development more efficient. Turns out, doing things properly from the start prevents costly rework later." That afternoon, I visited my expanded department. The compliance team occupied an entire floor now, with specialized units focused on different regulatory domains. The wall near the entrance displayed our new departmental mission statement: "Integrity is not negotiable." Jessica Alvarez, my newly appointed deputy, joined me for a walk through the department. A former regulatory attorney with cybersecurity expertise, Jessica brought complementary skills to our leadership team. "The quarterly training sessions are fully booked," she reported. "People actually want to understand compliance requirements now, not just check boxes." "Cultural change is the hardest part," I observed. "Technical systems are relatively easy to implement. Changing how people think about compliance takes consistent reinforcement." "Speaking of which," Jessica said, lowering her voice slightly, "the sentencing hearing for the Wells is tomorrow. Are you planning to attend?" I shook my head. My focus is on rebuilding, not witnessing their consequences. The truth was more complex, of course. Jackson and Audrey's fate didn't bring me satisfaction. Their choices had nearly destroyed a company that employed thousands of people working on technologies important to national security. The justice I sought wasn't their punishment, but Proxima's redemption. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave the office, Martin Fletcher's replacement as general counsel, David Chen, stopped by with a legal update. "The board approved the settlement with the whistleblower claims," he informed me. "Full reinstatement with back pay and accommodations for those who prefer not to return." This news did bring genuine satisfaction. Several employees who had raised concerns about Project Phoenix had been terminated or marginalized under Jackson's leadership. Vindicating them had been one of my priorities in the company's rehabilitation. "That's excellent," I replied. "Please ensure they understand there's no pressure either way. Some may not trust Proxima again, regardless of leadership changes." "Of course," David agreed. "Trust has to be earned, not assumed." The following week brought another significant milestone. A consortium of ethical investors had agreed to acquire a substantial stake in Proxima, providing capital needed for stability while requiring continued governance reforms. Their involvement represented a vote of confidence in the company's new direction. The investment group's representatives visited for due diligence meetings, spending considerable time with my compliance team. Their lead partner, Eleanor Sanderson, had built a reputation for investing in companies committed to ethical business practices. "Your compliance infrastructure is now the industry standard," Eleanor told me during a private conversation. "Several of our portfolio companies have asked to benchmark against your protocols." "We learned our lessons the hard way," I acknowledged. "If our experience helps others implement proper safeguards before problems develop, some good will have come from this ordeal." "More than some," Eleanor corrected. "You've created a template for how compliance can be a business advantage rather than just a cost center. That's transformative." 3 months later, I stood before a group of 20 new compliance professionals during their orientation. The diverse group represented our commitment to building a team with varied perspectives and experiences. "Compliance isn't about saying no," I explained. "It's about finding the right way to say yes. Our job isn't to prevent business activities, but to ensure they're conducted with integrity and in accordance with our legal and ethical obligations." A young woman raised her hand. What advice would you give someone just starting in compliance? I considered the question carefully. Trust your instincts when something doesn't seem right. Document meticulously. Build relationships across the organization so compliance is seen as a partner rather than an obstacle. And remember that integrity isn't situational. The rules apply even when following them is inconvenient. After the session, I returned to my office to find a package on my desk. Inside was a small crystal award from the Ethics and Compliance Officer Association, recognizing my extraordinary courage and commitment to professional integrity. The award was nice, but the real reward came later that afternoon. Patricia stopped by with breaking news. The Department of Defense has awarded us the security infrastructure contract. The selection committee specifically cited our compliance transformation as a decisive factor. This represented more than just a business win. It was validation that doing the right thing could also be the smart thing. The contract would secure Proxima's future and the livelihoods of everyone who worked there. That evening, I left the office earlier than usual. The spring evening was pleasant, with golden sunlight warming the city. As I walked to my car, I spotted a familiar figure in the parking garage. James, my ex-boyfriend, who couldn't understand why I wouldn't look the other way on minor violations, stood awkwardly beside his car. "Teresa," he called, approaching hesitantly. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by." "This is unexpected," I replied, genuinely surprised to see him after more than 3 years. "I saw your congressional testimony," he explained. "It was all over the news. I wanted to say I finally understand what you were trying to tell me back then." I waited, letting him find his words. "You said integrity wasn't negotiable, that small compromises lead to bigger ones," he continued. "I thought you were being rigid. But watching what happened at Proxima, how those small compromises nearly destroyed everything. I get it now." His recognition was unexpected but not unwelcome. "Thank you for telling me that. I'm sorry I wasn't supportive when it mattered," he added. "You deserved better." We talked briefly, catching up on each other's lives before parting amicably. His apology didn't change the past, but it offered a kind of closure I hadn't realized I needed. 1 year to the day after the boardroom confrontation, Proxima held a company-wide meeting to mark the anniversary. Not as a celebration, but as a recommitment to the values and practices that had emerged from the crisis. Patricia invited me to address the gathered employees. Looking out at the attentive faces, I reflected on the journey we had taken together. "A year ago, Proxima stood at a crossroads," I began. "The choices made by a few nearly destroyed what thousands of you had built through your hard work and talent. The path back hasn't been easy. It required difficult truths, painful changes, and unwavering commitment from each of you." I paused, taking in the nodding heads and serious expressions. "Today, Proxima stands as proof that integrity and success aren't opposing forces, but essential partners. Our compliance systems aren't just regulatory safeguards, they're the foundation for sustainable growth and meaningful work. The contracts we've secured, the clients who trust us, the investors who believe in our future, all of these stem from our collective commitment to doing business the right way." The applause that followed wasn't perfunctory but heartfelt. These people had lived through the uncertainty and worked tirelessly to rebuild something worthy of their talents and efforts. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office, reflecting on the journey. The compliance dongle that had sparked the confrontation was now preserved in a clear case on my bookshelf, a reminder that sometimes justice requires not just recognizing wrong, but strategically positioning truth where it cannot be ignored or denied. Jackson and Audrey Wells had believed their power made them untouchable. They never imagined that a small device, carefully placed in the right hands at the precisely chosen moment, would bring accountability they couldn't escape. The most profound lesson wasn't about compliance systems or legal strategies. It was about courage, the courage to stand firm when integrity is challenged, to speak truth despite isolation, to believe that right actions matter even when wrong ones seem to prevail. In demanding that I surrender company property, Audrey had inadvertently claimed ownership of the evidence of her own corruption. Her sense of power and entitlement had blinded her to the trap being set, That moment of arrogance had been her undoing. True power, I had learned, doesn't come from position or family connections. It comes from unwavering commitment to principles, from meticulous preparation, and from the courage to stand alone when necessary. These are the qualities that ultimately prevail when tested against the temporary advantages of wealth, position, or connection. In the years since that boardroom confrontation, Proxima had been transformed. Not just its leadership and compliance systems, but its culture and values. We had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to the principles that create sustainable success. And that, perhaps, was the most meaningful victory of all. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for what's right seemed impossibly difficult? When integrity demanded courage you weren't sure you had? I'd love to hear your stories and how you found the strength to do what was necessary. Please comment below to share your experiences. If you found this story meaningful or thought-provoking, please like this video, subscribe to this channel for more stories about professional courage and integrity, and share it with others who might be facing similar challenges in their own careers. Thank you for listening. And remember that in the end, integrity isn't just the right choice, it's the only choice that lets you look in the mirror with pride.